Today's gospel is from the Gospel of Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became angry with them and with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to be the great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, interesting position that James and John offer Jesus today. And it's interesting in a lot of ways. First of all, James is the oldest amongst the apostles. John is the youngest amongst the apostles. And they have been walking with Jesus all along, and quite frankly, they saw some great things. Jesus walked on water. Jesus fed 5,000. Jesus healed people. So amongst that, I would probably want to go up to Jesus and say the same exact thing. I want to be your right-hand man. It's a very Mediterranean point of view. It's growing up Italian. That's exactly what we would have done and said, "Hey, this guy is the guy, and we want to be his right and left-hand man." I mean, we want to do whatever Jesus does. And given that power, imagine having the power to walk on water. And subsequently, they actually saw Jesus flying into heaven at the Transfiguration, right? I want to fly. That's, who doesn't? That's these things are not necessarily unusual requests. "Hey, Jesus, we want you to give us a little bit of what you've got." So Jesus tempers them down a little bit and says, "Wait a second, you don't know what you're asking for." Okay? And because just right before this gospel, Jesus asked the apostles, "Who do you think that I am?" And Peter answers the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world to save us. And it becomes really apparent to them that that's the answer. Even though Jesus says yes, and I'm going to go to Jerusalem and be crucified and raised on the third day, they seem to ignore that part. They like, well, whatever. And I personally do never want to be crucified. It's just a gruesome thing that nobody really wants. And the reality is, if they understood what Jesus was saying, maybe they wouldn't have said, "I want to be, I want to do everything you can do. I want to be like you." And quite frankly, they took that role on after Jesus died and rose again and then ascended into heaven. James, the elder, was the first apostle to be martyred. James was in his late 40s, and Herod captured him, and he got beheaded, which is, compared to what Jesus went through, is actually quite merciful. And then John was the youngest of the apostles. He lived the longest. So you have the person who died first, and then the person who lived the longest. John went into the late part of the first century. Polycarp and Ignatius of Antioch are amongst John's disciples. So we have this, the faith being shared for probably at least a good 50 years after Jesus dies by John the Apostle. He was captured a few times. They tried to kill him a few times. But, he lived through it and lived a ripe old age. A lot of scholars think he was in his late 80s when he died, which coincidentally, both Polycarp and Ignatius were in their late 80s when they died. So he was a very prolific apostle. I love the Gospel of John and the letter and the Revelation of John. Very mystical, prayerful thinker, and that's I pride myself on wanting to be more mystical myself. So it's interesting how this dynamic occurs here. And Jesus does grant the apostles the ability to be like Jesus, to be apostles, to be, and as it said in the letter to Hebrews, there used to be a joke about how the Bible was about coffee lovers because of the letter to the Hebrews. Hebrews, get it? 2 words, Hebrews. Anyway, but anyway, in this letter, in the reading this morning that was awesomely read, thank you very much. It talks about you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now, as someone who's ordained a priest, I take that very seriously myself. And as the apostles were ordained to be apostles, they took it very seriously themselves. 10 of the 12 were martyred. They were martyred because of the faith, because of being witnesses of Jesus. St. Peter was crucified upside down. And so, you can see how this request in today's gospel is manifested in all the apostles and how they subsequently understood and took the word of Jesus Christ, the teachings, very, very seriously. As a matter of fact, on their feast days, the church wears red, except for the Apostle John, the church, because John was not martyred. And so the church wears white on his feast day. So this being said, you can see the fruit of Jesus' teachings. And I want to talk to you about a couple of people today. One of the things that irks me about organized or disorganized religion is the fact that this whole concept, secular concept of retirement. Eventually you get to the point where, let's see now, he's probably 70 and probably doesn't have a lot more to offer, right? Well, that's not true. It's never been true. John, in his most powerful teachings of his life, came well into his 80s. So I looked at, in modern day times, today is the feast day, actually, of Pope John Paul II. He was canonized as saint and it's celebrated today, October 22nd. Here's a person that throughout his entire life overcame several attempts at death, at murdering him. He survived the Holocaust. He's from Poland. And remember, during the 30s and 40s in Poland, it wasn't very pleasant there. And subsequently became a priest, bishop, cardinal, pope, and served very faithfully. There was an assassination attempt in the late 70s, where Pope John Paul II actually went to the prison of the person who shot him, and sat down with him and heard his confession and forgave him. A man who is much more noble than I am. But that being said, the thing I most admired about Pope John Paul II is that as he was getting older and physically unable to do some of the things he could have done, he could barely stand towards the end. They were lifting him up. I mean, they like Moses in the desert. They lifted his arm up. When he got tired, they lifted him up to give blessings, to consecrate the Eucharist. They were holding this guy up well into his 80s, and he never, and no matter how many people said, that guy should retire, right? Pope John Paul said, listen, you're a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And by the way, great job pronouncing Melchizedek. It's a hard word. But anyway, so he lasted his entire life serving God, doing ministry, never retiring. No matter how disabled he was, he stayed with it till the very end. And I admire him for that. Recently, I had the honor of ministering with a lady named Ruth Webster. Merriam. Webster's the dictionary, sorry. Ruth Merriam, and Pastor Ruth at the West Cumberland United Methodist Church. And she is in her 70s. I won't give the exact one. But she's as youthful as I'll ever be. And we were together for about, I think it was like 8 or 9 months. And there is this concept of retirement in a bunch of different denominations. But Pastor Ruth had so much vigor, and we had 9 months of charismatic joy in the church. I did not want her to retire. And quite frankly, I may have been able to convince her, but there was someone who was a little bit more influential than myself, specifically her husband, who's actually in his 80s. And he's like, look, I want to spend some quality time with my wife, so, I'm forcing her to retire. But I would have loved to have spent the next several years pastoring with Pastor Ruth. She was very charismatic, very serious about worship, and very serious about the message of God and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And so here's a great example of a modern day hero, someone local. She lives in Brunswick, who just says, I'm a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, right? I'm not going to retire. And even though, technically speaking, she says she's retired, she's already got in touch with local ministries in Brunswick and is already doing more ministry and more work and more teaching, much to the chagrin of her husband, but she is definitely still very active in the ministry of God. And that's the kind of thing that we're reading about in today's gospel and the letter to the Hebrews. And even the hymns today actually are very appropriate, because it talks about God. I'm still with you. God is, technically for eternity with you. But as long as you're here on the earth, God's still with you. And you still have to offer others that manifestation of God in your life, as well as help them with the manifestation of God in their lives. So again, the day is not only a feast day of ministry, but as you look amongst yourselves, and maybe one of these days I should bring Pastor Ruth with me and have her give the word, because you'll see exactly what I mean when it comes to that charismatic revelation of God's teachings. But that's exactly what the readings are about. So when people read it and they might say, this is kind of like a little uncomfortable. You got two people that are asking to sit at Jesus's left and right hand, and it just seems like, before you get too upset about what James and John were asking, look at their lives, look what they've accomplished in life, and then ask yourself, exactly, can I emulate these great people? The Jameses and the Johns and the Pope Johns and the Pastor Ruths of the world. Are you going to be able to do or still do what they are still doing? Okay? And all I can say is I am not retiring ever. So, amen.
Amen.
There's that.